if you think about how large quantities of energy get moved around this country, for oil and gas, they go through these big energy highways called transmission pipelines. And our members collectively move virtually all of the natural gas and oil produced and used in Canada. Some, of course, goes by rail, some goes by truck, but the vast majority is by pipeline. And together, the member companies of CEPA operate over 110,000 kilometers of pipeline every day in Canada and have done so for a very, very long time. So the track record is clear, and the expanse of the networks that enable us to enjoy energy in Canada and British Columbia are vast. Context is really important, and one of the things that I think you have heard from a number of the speakers today is that when you're looking at the current energy context and the question about pipelines, there has to be a coming together of what on this slide is called reputation, social license to operate, trust, and the economic opportunities that are there. And when those two come together and we earn the reputation through a world-class safety record, which we have, through transparency, which we're attempting to do much more of, and through engaging, which of course we also have been doing but intend to do much more of. That is a fundamental component of together in Canada, us realizing sustainable development opportunities. And by sustainable development, I mean, of course, the traditional coming together, blending, and optimization of economics, environment, and social interests. This is an industry, I'm an engineer, so I can make jokes about how engineers don't really like to talk to folks. They'd much rather be in the back room solving a big technical problem. And as a result, are quite shocked that when people say, I never even knew you guys were there. For decades, you've been running these big, huge pipes, a meter under the ground. They never caused a problem. I just went to the gas station every day and drove my kids to soccer, never really thought about it. And suddenly there are questions, and some folks in our industry, I think, have taken some time to realize it's actually really important that we move from out of sight, out of mind to an integral part of what people think about when they think about energy. There is, of course, some lurking opportunities to provide what I'll call misinformation. And one I'll speak to as an example is the question of diluted bitumen and whether or not it's corrosive in pipelines. As a metallurgist, I first read this headline in one of the reports that came out about 18 months ago, and I thought, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Unfortunately, facts sometimes don't matter, and this became sort of a bellwether of misinformation that somehow moving bitumen destroyed pipelines and therefore was inherently hazardous. You know, the facts stand for themselves. Bitumen is not more corrosive than other things we move. There is no abrasive sand in these products. All the sand stays in Fort McMurray. There are very strong pipeline specifications that it all be removed. And even if you thought that I was making that up, the very transparent actual safety results provided by our regulators, ourselves, and those who might look into when and if a problem occurs recognize and clearly point to the fact that if and when corrosion is a problem in pipelines, and that is occasionally, it is almost never from inside the pipeline. It's almost always from the outside. And we know that phenomena very, very well and understand it and look for it with sophisticated instruments from inside the pipe and address it as we need to. But the long story short is that the mythology around bitumen and corrosivity in pipes has been one of the most phenomenal learnings I've had in my role, probably in part because I was blind to the fact that people could actually believe that sort of thing, since I knew that it was patently false. But unfortunately, even on the safety side, not only has that example created fear and mistrust, it's also been a huge distraction. I was quite dismayed to discover last fall that an august group of corrosion engineers were gathering in Toronto, and the headline of their conference was Bitumen corrosivity. And all of the folks that I talked to knew that there was not an issue technically, but here you had some of our best engineers focused on an issue that actually was not going to yield any additional safety results. We need these folks focused on the things that actually do matter.
There was a lot of regulation on the shipping industry following the events of the Exxon Valdez back in '89. We had the 1990 Oil Pollution Act in the United States, and then in 1992, the International Maritime Organization dictated that we would actually begin the switch to double-hull tankers. And most of the world today is exclusively double-hulled tankers by law. There's less than 20 single-hulled tankers remaining right now, and they're very confined in terms of where they can actually trade. And I can assure you that North America is not one of those jurisdictions. There's a lot of additional regulations, some of it mandatory, some of it voluntary, that we subject ourselves to. We have port state control, by which Transport Canada comes down to ships and inspects them. We have a lot of industry self-regulation in terms of self-vetting, and it's just one safety mitigation on top of another that we try to discipline ourselves with and ensure that we meet the highest possible safety standards. And that's a theme for the marine industry just as much as it is for the pipeline industry. We have additional enforcement through something called classification societies, flag states, and as I said, port state control. In terms of the context of traffic on the British Columbia coast, we hear a lot of comment, and we read a lot of media description around the level of tanker traffic that could potentially materialize on the coast of British Columbia. But in a world context, even if all the projects come to see the light of day, is still at a very, very low level for the marine industry. And I give you a couple of examples. One that I'm sharing with you here is the Dover Straits. It carries about 25% of world trade, but you have 600 ships a day up and down and crisscrossing the Dover Straits, 600. Now, in the port of Vancouver, we see roughly 3,200 in a year. So it gives a little bit of context as to what the traffic volume really is. Another example that I'd like to share with you is the Malacca Straits. For those of us who've been at sea for a number of years, we know the area well. But if you take the port of Singapore, 128,000 ships a year in 2011, about the same in 2012, including 22,000 tankers. We're not going to get anywhere near those sort of volumes. And by the way, the Malacca Straits at its narrowest point is a mile and a half across. So we can start to make some comparisons in terms of traffic flow and the navigational challenges that we're faced with. Another one that I need to share with you is the Bosphorus, and I was just talking to Norske Veritas last week. They're conducting a risk assessment for ships transiting the Bosphorus, which at its narrowest point is about 4 cables, 0.4 of a nautical mile. And they're currently handling 50,000 ships a year. 8,000 of those ships are actually tankers. And just to give you a little bit of a geographic perspective, at its narrowest point, 698 meters, that's as I said, 0.4 of a nautical mile. And that's what you're dealing with. And they're dealing with 8,000 tankers a year, 55,000 ships a year. So we sort of get some feeling of our situation versus the situation that others are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and what is the context for shipping in the future in British Columbia. From the point of view of the professional marine industry, if everything comes to pass, it's very, very manageable. And that's the message that I'd like to share with you. Even in the Douglas Channel, and every day of the week, perhaps in the media, we hear something about the Douglas Channel. At its narrowest point, it's 0.9 of a nautical mile. And that depiction is with 2 tankers, potentially, or any type of ship going up and down the Douglas Channel. There's lots of sea room. But we have said, look, if there's a real concern around this, let's keep it to one-way traffic in that narrowest point off Point Ashton, that 0.8, 0.9 of a nautical mile. And myself, as a seafarer, I worked for a company that carried nearly all of the aluminium from Alcan for many years. We also carried about 80% of the paper from Hurricane when there was still a mill in Kitimat. So on a personal level, I also know these waters quite well. And I can tell you not only the Douglas Channel, but the whole West Coast, in terms of the challenges for the marine industry, is one of the places that we like to come because it's not a place that is particularly challenging in terms of the navigational issues.
Right-of-way incidents are very infrequent, and by and large they are attributed to third-party damage. The majority, and if we go back to 1953, 55 maybe, I believe we've had 72 incidents, and a full 60 odd of those, or almost 60 of those, have been in facilities. So over 60 years there's been maybe a dozen that have been on right-of-way, and very, very few recently. And the way I think I would answer it is this. If you think of the facilities that you're talking about, Scott, those are tank farms, they're pump stations, they're places where we have valving, they're places where we have lots of above-ground equipment that's operating. There's valves, there's gaskets, there's equipment, there's machinery. And the various pieces and components of that, I think by definition, have a higher probability of failure than the pipe that's in the ground. So what have we done about that, to recognize that risk? Well, firstly, we have containment at all those facilities. So I can't think of an incident where we had a failure at a facility and that any of the spill got off of the property. So it's contained within containment that's designed to capture anything that occurs. Secondly, what we've done, and this is as recent as the last 5 or 6 years, is we've instituted in my company a very strict and diligent facility management program that perhaps didn't exist decades ago. So we've recognized that the weakest link in the chain, if you like, is at these above ground facilities where all of this machinery and equipment's operating, and we've really high-graded our facility management program to prevent those things. That said, incidents can occur, and that's the most likely place where you've got a ring or a gasket that might fail. So in fact, in response to the incident we had in Abbotsford and Sumas last year, we've undertaken a broad program of air monitoring that we've instituted in Abbotsford now around that tank farm, so we get early and immediate warning if there's any change in air quality. Secondly, what we've done is we've instituted a further and more developed on-site suppression facilities where we can put foam over oil and mitigate those odors. So we're very seriously now looking at facilities as being that link that we need to spend more time and money on, and we're doing that.